A man lowers a lit candle on a string into the bottom of a half-finished well, and he stands at the edge watching one thing: the flame. If that flame keeps burning, he climbs down into the dark to keep working. If it shrinks, flickers, and goes out, he does not go anywhere near that hole, because something is waiting down there that he cannot see, cannot smell, and cannot fight with his hands. People assume the hardest part of cutting a well through solid rock was the rock itself. The rock only took muscle and time. The thing that actually killed well diggers waited silently at the bottom of the shaft, and the way they learned to beat it explains how these wells ever got built at all. This story doesn't really start with stone. It starts with need. A family settling a piece of land could survive a lot of hardships, but they could not survive without water close to home, and hauling every bucket from a distant creek was not a life anyone could keep up for long, so they dug. In soft ground, digging a well was backbreaking but simple, a wide shaft going straight down, one shovelful at a time, until water seeped into the bottom. The trouble came when the shovel stopped biting. A few feet down, sometimes more, the blade would scrape against something that would not move, a shelf of bedrock sitting between the family and the water they knew was somewhere below it. At that point, most would assume the project was finished, because you cannot shovel stone. And yet wells went straight through that rock by the thousands, all across frontier country, long before anyone had an engine to help. Understanding how means throwing out the picture of a man chipping at granite with a pick, because that picture is wrong. For many families, this wasn't a job they did themselves. Digging through rock was specialized, dangerous work, so they often hired it out to men who traveled from farm to farm, sinking wells for a living, arriving with their own steels, hammers, powder, and rope. A good well digger was a known and valued figure, the person you sent for when the ground turned to stone. The reason that trade existed is simple. The work could quietly kill someone who didn't understand it. When the digging hit rock, the whole job changed from moving dirt to breaking stone, and there were two honest ways to do that by hand. If the rock was soft or full of natural seams, like sandstone or weathered layers, a worker could drive steel wedges into a line of holes and split it apart along the crack, the same way stone was quarried for buildings. But hard rock, the kind that rang when you struck it, wouldn't split politely. For that, the only real answer was to drill a hole deep into the stone, pack it with black powder, and blast a section loose. Pay attention to this next part, because it explains everything about why these wells took so long. Drilling that hole was done entirely by arm and hammer. There was no bit spinning under power and no machine pressing down. A person held a long rod of hardened steel against the rock, struck the end of it with a hammer, turned it slightly, and struck it again, over and over, grinding a hole into solid stone one blow at a time. A single hole, only a few feet deep, could take the better part of an hour in tough rock, and a well needed many of them. There were two ways to swing it. A man working alone used what was called single jacking. He held a short hammer weighing around 3.5 to 4.5 pounds in one hand, gripped the drill steel in the other, and brought the hammer down on the end of the steel while turning the rod a quarter turn between each strike. That quarter turn mattered more than it sounds, because it kept the cutting edge biting fresh rock instead of pounding the same groove. When two people worked together, they called it double jacking, and it was faster and far more nerve-wracking to watch. One person, the holder, knelt and gripped the steel with both bare hands, rotating it a little after every blow. The other swung a long-handled sledge weighing 8 to 10 pounds, bringing it down on a rod that sat inches from their partner's fingers. The good teams found a rhythm and trusted it completely, sometimes striking 60 or more times a minute, the holder turning the steel in the half-second gap between each swing. One missed swing in that rhythm meant a crushed hand, and everyone working knew it. It's worth asking where an ordinary settler even learned to do this, and the answer is that much of the skill traveled with people who had already done it underground. A large share of the experienced hard rock miners in the American West came from Cornwall in England, where families had worked tin and copper mines for generations. They carried the hammer and steel craft with them, and that same knowledge spread out to the farms, quarries, and homesteads that needed someone who understood how to beat rock by hand. There were small tricks that made the difference between progress and exhaustion. The broken rock dust had to come out of the hole constantly, because a bed of powder at the bottom cushioned the blows and wasted the work. So the driller poured a little water into the hole to turn the dust into mud, then pulled the steel and wrapped it clean before going back in. As the hole got deeper, the driller swapped in progressively longer rods of steel, starting with a short one for control and moving to longer lengths to reach the bottom, since the shortest steel always gave the steadiest, most accurate strike. The steel itself dulled fast against the stone, which is why a blacksmith was worth his weight on any serious job, reheating and resharpening the bits at a small forge so the crew never had to stop for long. And there's a detail almost everyone misses today. A hole drilled by hand isn't round. Because the steel was turned by hand a fraction at a time, the hole came out with 3 rough sides, almost a triangle, while a machine-drilled hole is perfectly round. Centuries later, that triangular scar in old stone is how you can still tell a human cut it. Once the hole was deep enough, the real danger of the day began. The driller poured black powder down into the hole, set a fuse, and carefully tamped the charge tight, because a poorly packed charge could send the tamping rod up out of the hole like a spear or set the powder off early. The tamping had to be done with a wooden rod rather than anything that could spark, and the fuse had to be cut long enough to give everyone time to climb the rope and clear the shaft. A misjudged fuse. In a hole a person could only climb out of slowly, left almost no room for error. Then the fuse was lit, and they waited for the blast to crack the rock apart far below the surface. After the smoke cleared and the air settled, the workers went back down to haul out what they had broken loose. And this is where the story takes a turn most people never picture. Every single piece of shattered rock had to come up out of that shaft by hand. They loaded it into a bucket, and a person at the top turned a windlass, which was simply a log mounted sideways with a crank handle, winding the rope around it to lift the load. On bigger jobs, instead of a simple windlass, crews rigged a tripod of timbers over the mouth of the shaft with a pulley at the top, which gave them a straighter, steadier lift for both the heavy buckets of rock and the workers riding up and down on the rope. The person at the bottom lived with another danger, one that came from directly above. A tool knocked off the edge or a single rock slipping out of a rising bucket became a deadly missile in a narrow shaft, so the digger and the man on the windlass worked out calls and rope signals before anything moved. Bucket after bucket of broken stone rose up out of the dark, was dumped, and went back down empty, and only then could the drilling start again on the fresh rock below. If you are enjoying watching how this actually worked, take a second to subscribe, because I dig into Lost Frontier skills like this every week. Now let us look at the part of the job that turned an ordinary well into something genuinely dangerous. While all of that breaking and hauling was happening at the bottom, there was a second, quieter battle going on with the shaft itself. A hole going straight down through earth and rock wants to collapse, and a cave-in with a person at the bottom was almost always fatal, so the walls had to be held back as the shaft got deeper. In rock, the stone often held on its own, but through the softer ground above it, diggers lined the shaft as they went, fitting stones or laying brick in a ring against the walls and packing clay behind them to lock everything in place. The most clever method did not fight the collapse at all. Workers would build a sturdy ring at the surface, then dig out the ground underneath it so the ring sank down under its own weight, then stack another ring on top and keep digging, letting the lining sink deeper and deeper as a solid sleeve that protected the people inside. That lining was carried all the way up and built a foot or two above the ground at the end, forming the low stone wall around the top that most of us picture when we hear the word well. For a while, a deep well could feel almost routine, a hard rhythm of drill, blast, and haul that a good crew could settle into. That sense of routine is exactly what made the next danger so deadly. The deeper a shaft went, the more a particular invisible threat could gather at the bottom, and it gave almost no warning. Carbon dioxide, what older accounts called carbonic acid gas, is heavier than ordinary air, so it sinks and pools in the lowest, most enclosed spaces it can find, and the bottom of a sealed well shaft is close to perfect for it. You can't see it, you can't smell it. A digger could climb down feeling fine and simply grow faint and collapse before he understood anything was wrong, and at a high enough concentration that gas can kill a person in minutes. This wasn't a rare freak event. Through the 1800s, newspapers and medical journals recorded case after case of well diggers and would-be rescuers who climbed down into a quiet shaft and never climbed back out. The early signs were a warning that plenty of men ignored, and ignoring them got them killed. So the careful ones tested first. They would lower a lit candle or a lantern to the bottom on a rope and watch the flame, because fire needs the same breathable air a person does. If the flame burned steady, the air was safe enough to enter. If it dimmed and died, that was the signal to stay out and to clear the bad air before anyone went down. To do that, they would lower bundles of burning brush, fan air down the shaft, or pour water in to disturb the gas, anything to flush that pocket of death out of the hole before a person took its place. After all of that, the drilling, the blasting, the endless buckets, and the constant watch on the air, the reward was simple and enormous. Somewhere down in the rock, water began to seep in and gather at the bottom of the shaft. The crew would line the lowest section so the walls stayed clean and the water stayed clear. And then the same windlass that had hauled out tons of broken stone took on its real and lasting job, lifting a bucket of cold, clean water up to the surface. A well like that wasn't just a hole in the ground. To the family who owned it, it was the thing that made the land livable, dug by hand through stone that most people today would assume required heavy machinery to beat. This whole way of working had a clear ending. By the middle of the 1800s, steam and compressed air drills arrived, machines that could pound holes into rock faster than any pair of arms. And within a generation, the hand-drilling crews faded out of the trade almost entirely. The skill that had opened up wells, mines, and railroads across the country became a memory, kept alive today, mostly in old stone scars and a few competitions where people still swing a hammer at a steel rod for sport. But think about that man at the start, standing at the edge of his unfinished well, lowering a candle into the dark and reading his own survival in a flame. Everything below him had been broken loose, lifted out and lined by human hands, one careful blow and one watchful breath at a time. The wells they left behind are still out there in the ground, proof of just how much people could accomplish with a hammer, a rod of steel, and a very healthy respect for what they couldn't see. The next time you pass an old stone well in a field or along a country road, look closely at the shaft, because the marks left in that rock are a record of weeks of dangerous, patient work that no machine ever touched. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. If you would like to continue watching more of my videos on frontier skills, you can click the video on the screen now.